Okay, we are back on the air, and thank you to everyone out there who was with us for the first broadcast. We have a lot of guests coming through. They will be coming and going at various times, and so we thank everyone who has joined us so far. Feel free to jump in when you need to, and we understand that you may have to leave abruptly because we didn't have enough time to plan this, but it was too important not to do the best we could. The reason we're here today is we want to talk about what's going on with contingent electric skin shock, which here at Neuroclastic we call shock torture. CESS, or contingent electric skin shock, is currently being voted on at ABAI, the Association for Behavior Analysis International. And there are two different position statements. One that basically endorses shock as it's currently being used at Judge Rotenberg Center, and one that opposes shock in all forms. And so, Jonathan, would you take a minute and introduce yourself to our audience, and then tell us kind of your role in this? Earlier, we had Amy Odom. There were two people whose resignation letters Neuroclassic published without knowing those people. And Jonathan Tarbox was the second one. You met Amy earlier today. And so it was a brave thing that you did. And I want to first check in with you and get your feedback and your kind of summary of where things are and how things have progressed since then.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say to Tara and to the neuroclastic community how much and I think we ABA folks really appreciate the opportunity to be here and share some space with you, and for you all to give us an opportunity to chat and dialogue with you. It really means a great deal to us. So thank you. I know in many ways maybe we haven't earned the right to be here, but you're giving us this opportunity, and we really genuinely appreciate that. So my name is Jonathan Tarbox. I'm the program director of the Masters of Science in ABA program at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I've been doing ABA for 22, 23 years, something like that. So I was, along with Dr. Amy Odom, the two of us were in charge of the program committee for the overall ABAI annual convention, which is the largest largest behavior analytic conference in the world, which also then ends up being the largest ABA conference in the world, mostly attended by practitioners and people working in the field trying to help folks. And for many years, the Judge Rotenberg Center had been presenting presentations on shocking people to modify their behavior. And basically, people had sort of just not really addressed this issue, and kind of just, I think, precedent weighed very heavily. And so because these submissions to the conference had been accepted in the past, people continued to accept them. And I think that honestly, when neurodiversity advocates had showed up at the conference in past years and protested, a lot of us, just some self-disclosure here, a lot of us didn't get it and kind of thought, oh, this is just a few extreme elements. These people are sort of, irrational or something. And honestly didn't pay attention and didn't take ownership and responsibility for the fact that human dignity is being called out for, and that these protests are happening at our convention. And it wasn't until folks like Amy and I, and we were by no means the first, but Amy and I started to ask ourselves questions like, well, hang on a second. People are standing there holding signs to stand up for the rights of autistic people to not be shocked. who is it in this world that stands up for autistic people, and why is it not us? Like, wait a minute, like and Amy's a basic researcher. She works with rats and pigeons and basic research with humans. She actually is not involved in practice or autism at all, but still cares about the science of behavior, which the purpose of our science is to try to create a world that is as free from coercion as possible. That's always been the purpose of the science of behavior analysis since back to the 1940s. And so if that's our purpose, if that's our value, we should be the ones standing up there with the science. Like, why are we letting somebody else take on this duty? This is completely backwards. And so Amy and I were just no longer felt comfortable with letting the status quo be the status quo anymore. So we raised concerns. We fought pretty hard internally to try to change things. And we saw that that wasn't working, and we just could no longer, in good conscience, be a part of the status quo. And so we chose to resign from our positions. And we did it privately. We CC'd the people who were involved directly, which was about 30 people in service roles involved. We didn't do it publicly, we did it privately. And then our resignation letter was shared on the internet without our permission by a lot of folks. And looking back, I think that's probably had a positive impact, so it's fine. At first, we didn't even know who leaked it, but it doesn't matter. Anyways, so yeah, here we are. And they initiated this process of convening a committee of scientists to address the issue of shock from a scientific standpoint, from a research standpoint, and then to make recommendations. And from the beginning, Amy and I were really concerned about that because we didn't think that people were calling out for more scientific inquiry about shocking people. We thought that the community was calling out for morality and ethics around the issue of shocking people. And it didn't seem like it really mattered how many research publications there were on shock or not. There's a very strong consensus in the human community that shocking human beings and using pain to modify human behavior is not acceptable from a moral and ethical standpoint. So the committee did their assigned task, which was reviewing the research, and then came up with a bunch of suggestions that basically say if you follow these guidelines, then it's ethical to shock human beings to modify their behavior. And some people interpret those guidelines as being much more strict than what the JRC does. So one way of interpreting the guidelines is even if the committee's guidelines got approved by this vote, that would stop the JRC from being able to present at the convention. Other people interpret those guidelines as actually condoning and including what the JRC does. I think there's room for both interpretations. In any case, here we are. This is one of the most important moments in the history of our field in ABA that we have an opportunity to show who we are with a vote. And so the vote ends November 14th. And I really, really genuinely, from the bottom of my heart, implore people to vote for position B, which is the denouncing shock in all forms. The problem is only...
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. It sounds like you were about to address that. When you say you encourage people to vote, who's able to vote currently?
Exactly. Yeah, thank you for that. So the problem is the only people who are allowed to vote on position statements for the Association for Behavior Analysis International are people who are full members. So there's different levels of membership. Full membership was originally reserved only for scientists, not for practitioners. There has been some change around that in recent years. So it is actually possible for practitioners to become full members, but people aren't aware of that, and there aren't very many. So the vast majority of people who are full members are people with PhDs and people who are primarily researchers, like myself. And some of them are involved in helping human beings, and a lot of them are not. And so that's a major concern, because the vast majority of people whose careers are affected by this, and the vast majority of people who actually interact with autistic folks and try to empower them and try to do good in the world, actually don't have the opportunity to vote. So we'll see. And it's a structural issue, and the bylaws of ABAI as an organization need to be changed so that practitioners, the people who form the vast majority of the association, have the opportunity to vote. Currently, that's not the case.
So I want to also call attention to this full membership. It is your kind of your old guard, right?
Yeah.
Your people who have been a part of the system probably for a long time, and this is a majority people with substantial white privilege.
Yeah. Majority
And so,
PhD and majority white. Yeah.
and they are the ones who have by far the most privilege to influence both at the actual voting level and just with regards to they're the ones writing the textbooks, teaching the courses, training people, creating materials, all of this. So, what is ABAI doing to level the playing field, to undo some of the harm that they have caused? What do you think at this current moment in time
Hmm.
they either are doing or should be doing to level the playing field so that autistic people, for one, but also people within your own field and adjacent fields who are not the old guard of people who have generational privilege, how can they contribute, or what is ABAI doing to make sure that they're hearing from everyone else?
I appreciate that question. So right now, there's a big argument going on behind the scenes about who should be able to vote, and allowing the other classes of membership to vote seems like the single largest thing that ABAI could do as an organization to empower the vast majority of people who are actually affected by the decisions to have a say in the decisions. Now, that's only for members of ABAI, many of whom are autistic, but not the majority, obviously. In addition to that, allowing other classes of membership to vote, in addition to that, would be inclusion. Imagine that. And so centering autistic voices, and not just autistic voices, but other neurodiverse voices, into the overall processes and representation in the organization would be really powerful too. And there's other people who are much more qualified than me to talk about what that should look like and how that should go. But simply centering and honoring autistic voices would be a major potential contribution that the association needs to start doing. And just recently in years, they started inviting autistic people as speakers at conferences. And that's great, but it's very little, and it's, decades late maybe, right? But at least
Also,
it's a step in the right direction.
also they are not inviting, they are inviting autistic people. However, they are very tightly curating which autistic people are allowed to participate. And not just that, by choosing autistic voices who are not connected to the broader autistic community, who haven't spent a long time listening to other autistic people, they are putting those people at extreme risk for abuse and antagonism, and also from they're choosing people who will toe the party lines, right? Because that's more convenient, and that's tokenizing autistic people. But also, it's cruelty to those autistic people because they are going against what autistic people who have the benefit of community, who have listened to other autistic people. As an autistic person, I only know what my own life is like unless I spend a ton of time engaging with other autistic people to know what their lives are like. I still can't tell you from their personal experience, but I can do a lot to learn when I'm in community with other autistic people. That is not the autistic people that they are allowing to engage in a lot of these conferences. So it's kind of cruel to limit things. Currently, we have 10 people. If you are watching the stream and trying to enter, we can only have 10 people on a stream at a time. If you're here in the stream and you can come back in a few minutes, that will be helpful, because we want to give everybody a chance to speak, and we don't know who all is coming because there are a lot of maybes. So, yeah. Let's ask Pablo next. Pablo, you have worked a lot with, I know you've worked a lot with autistic advocates and you have been trying to make some changes. Can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then what your feelings are right now, and your summary of what you're seeing happening with ABAI and the votes to the whole process with considering and talking about electric shock.
Sure, yeah. Thank you very much for having me here, and I agree with Jonathan's sentiments as well. We very much appreciate being able to be a part of this conversation and contribute to it and help certainly move autistic perspectives forward. Um, I am the co-director of Triad, which is the Autism Institute at the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center, and I'm also the director of behavior analysis for the Vanderbilt Kennedy Center and our division of developmental medicine here at the medical center. And a large part of my role is certainly engaging across all levels of processes, from early intervention all the way up through um, adulthood driven services. And I think as far as my thoughts on ABAI, I'll be upfront and say I went to ABA, the big ABA conference this past year for the first time in about 13 years. And that was primarily because of some kind of larger issues I've had with the association over that time, and that I think are pretty similar to some of the things we're hearing now. I'm a member of ABAI, but not a full member, so I actually can't vote on this proposition. Um, and certainly would be voting for Plan B if I was able to. But again, I'm not able to. I think Jonathan makes a great point that it would be wonderful to open it up to certainly all members to be able to have their voice heard. But I think this is just indicative of a larger issue we have as a field, and particularly with ABI being our largest professional organization, they should be the one driving, in many ways, substantive engagement with the communities that we're trying to serve. Um, over 75% of behavior analysts work in the autism field, and so we should be directly engaging with people who are neurodivergent, autistic people, other people with disabilities, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and we're just not at a level that is fair, equitable, and certainly not at a level that's actually shaping the way we practice. You look at a lot of the issues that come about, many of them, there are many issues. A lot of the ones we hear about and talk about quite frequently within our work are compliance-based services and those goals that are focused on conformity. And those are big ones in our field across the board that still within practice we see a lot. And although we don't see a lot of uh, I don't see a lot of punishment-based programs within our area with some of the behavior plans that come across our desk for review, but there are ones that are certainly there, and there are ones that we would certainly label as coercive and have. Um, CESS is pretty much confined to what happens at JRC, and I don't know any other way to move forward other than being able to call for an outright ban against that. And our team has done that. We put together a statement uh, in response to ABAI's report that came out and their proposed recommendations, which did not go far enough. I'm really glad to see they have these two options up now. But as we've been saying, there's just not enough people who are actually deep in the applied work who can have their voice heard within this. And again, that just limits it to behavior analysts. And we need to open it up beyond that and really think about the stakeholder groups that we're supporting, the people we're serving, and trying to figure out how to get those voices, one, amplified, being able to share those perspectives directly, but in a way that actually impacts our practice. And there are ways to do that. And there are some models for how to do that well, but we have not done that well at a national scale.
Thank you so much for that. And Summer, I know that you are on your lunch break right now, right? And you have a very short amount of time. I don't want to. How about you just say what you would most like to say without me asking a question? Because I know your time is limited, and so, and you have a lot to say. So, is there something that you really would like to express right now?
Yes. I do want to tell Pablo and the Triad team thank you. Their statement or response to the statement that you all constructed was very thorough. And I guess, whether it is true or it isn't true that they are going to go ahead with the task force report, there was a very valid point in the Triad's statement to the report, in that there's a complete dismissal of current research as it relates to severe problem behavior. And like, I don't understand what, for me, I couldn't reconcile why that was left out of the task force report for future recommendations for where we could potentially go, like as of we could be working on right now. But I guess more, this is really hard for me to talk about. I'm sorry, dear. I think from a lot of the work that I do, that I am hearing for people who are for CESS is, the autistic community saying we're looking for accommodation, we're missing accommodations, and people aren't seeing us. Here's where I kind of like to bridge some language for everybody, because I think if we could do that in a way that honors the autistic community and pulls the BCBAs in to understand what we're actually talking about here. Accommodation is just a scratch in what people are advocating for. We know that skills need to be taught. We understand, the severity of what this looks like if a person isn't able to access the things that they want and need in effective ways. So when you discount lived experience, what you're saying is, as Pat Fryman says, he calls these circumstantial situations. Lived experiences are antecedent events to what you may be seeing. So this is exactly what we're talking. It's the same language. We're all saying the same thing. It's not connecting. And if you get A wrong, meaning antecedent, B becomes misinformed. And so C, your intervention is also not as effective. I'm not saying that across the board, but this is what the autistic community is trying to say. We can help inform that. You don't have to do that by yourself. There are things that you could be missing that you probably are missing. And if we say, we won't change your behavior until we understand you. Do you understand us? There's pieces missing that we're advocating for that affect all of this. And there's research out there. Dr. Roger Rahman has wonderful research that's come out on his enhanced choice model, which takes into account trauma. And it's lazy for me. I know I'm not trying to call people names. We can do something. There's steps that we can take today. There's people that can be reaching out today to help better inform how to go forward and past ABAI and getting these people like actual help. Tara, I gotta go. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Summer, so much. And I think that that's a really complicated, big subject that we have a hard time putting to words, is that it doesn't matter what your intentions are. If you're not, even if you listen to us, you might still get the antecedents wrong, but you have a much better chance of understanding why we do these things that are not observable if you don't live in an autistic brain and body. And not every autistic person has the same experiences, but as community, when we talk among each other all the time, every day, and we have these years of community built knowledge, that we are starting to better understand things. We are light years ahead of where the quote scientific community is. And there is a culture in ABA, not just ABA, but very dominant within ABA, that is basically your diagnosis, it doesn't matter. We're just going to address the behaviors that we observe. And there are a ton of people, especially this Judge Rotenberg Center clique, they really don't believe in diagnoses. They don't believe in the DSM, and they feel that that is, radical. But they're literally taking people who have diagnosed severe schizophrenia and delusional disorders, and this is not autism, this is other things, that who do not have a complete ability at this current point in their lives to live in the same reality as other people. And they're taking them off their medications and then shocking them for behaviors that are related to their diagnoses. And that's cruel. That is unacceptable. And I think what you said, Summer, really gets kind of to the core of that, is we can't look at antecedents as if everything that happens has something that is just recent and observable, and then address those behaviors as if they happen in a vacuum. And Oswin, I am so glad that you're here, because you have been one of the most transformative figures in my personal activism, and I feel that you've spent longer in this community and doing this work than most people, period. This autistic advocacy is traumatic, period. And to have toughed it out for this long, to have gone through so much, but you have this remarkable knowledge base that is fair and nuanced and intersectional. And I am just really glad that you're here, and would love to hear what your thoughts are right now. I don't want to ask a question because I'm sure you have something great to say.
I mean, I have several things to say because there's been lots of different things. So I'm going to start from where we just ended and go backwards. So like you were just talking about having these behaviors that are a part of a disability. Well, the ethics code for BCBAs, just across the board, clearly says that they're supposed to take that into account, and they're not. If they're taking people off meds and then treating those behaviors in that way, they're going against the ethical code. Not only that, but there is a way to allow for an internal driven reason for behavior response. It's called a sensory. It's called sensory. That's when we're talking about and I think that I'm saying all this because I need autistic people to know that, like, they're even going against their own science by doing this. Because that internal driven behaviors, they know that they can't target that. So when we look at elopement, then yes, we're looking at escape, and we're looking at also, obviously, we're looking at trauma responses, but I don't think that most BCBAs see that most of the time. But that just means that when we're describing it and we're seeing treatment plans that include targeting those things in a behavioral way, they're not supposed to be doing that anyways. That's literally not what they're supposed to be doing. They're going against their own science. They're going against their own ethics code. And the problem is there is no mechanism within ABAI or BACB to, I mean, there's a mechanism, but it doesn't actually have any response that actually gets people to stop. There's no, like, if we're looking at it from a big behaviorist standpoint and what behaviors can do, then they should be really lobbying for changes in the way that those things are investigated and looked at, so that they can be going further in making sure that people that are practicing in those ways, which will then include the JRC, that is how we can target against it, even if we can't get this voting majority on their plans, because they're gatekeeping it behind a paywall and a degree wall and a field wall. Like, if we're saying that they're not going to do this because of that, then BCBAs really should be doing more to make sure that they are actually following through with what their ethics says and with what the science says. And then that gets us into a whole new cohort of stuff that we can target with, that they're targeting with autistic people, that we shouldn't be targeting anymore, because we know the science behind it does not support that these things are a choice, which, if we're looking at it as a behavior and trying to change behavior, we're looking at a behavior choice that they think that they're changing. We're not, we're just making people fawn, more or less. That's the response that we're getting from that's the success in ABA right now, is fawning. So I think that there's more that can be done from the BCBA side, since ABAI clearly does not want the advice or the direction from the majority of the people that are working in the community. And that's just where they're standing right now, is that they want to be able to leave it to, and I'm going to name names, Justin Leaves, the people that are doing all the research, you know?
Yep. And go ahead and name the names, because somebody has to.
And I know that the BCBAs can't without like repercussions of like being, of them targeting them. I can do it without a problem because I'm not a BCBA. So I'd rather do so.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Leland, thank you for joining us. Heard about you. I'd like to offer just the opportunity to introduce yourself and weigh in on what feels most important to you to say right now. I'm not sure how long you have to be with us, so in case it's not long.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, my name is Warner Leland. I am a board certified behavior analyst. I'm a neurodivergent human. I feel deeply passionate about this topic, and also I feel like the things that are showing up for me in it are sort of the broader contexts of field-wide culpability, and the ways in which, like, ultimately this vote one way or another is kind of a performative thing, right? Like, this isn't going to make a change in what's happening with the JRC. We don't have any political power as a task force statement. I'm not on the task force, but like broadly, I am a voting member of the organization currently. And so, like, one way or another, the function of a statement being passed is minimal. It's, taking a stand, whatever that means, one way or another in an organization, and sort of like fronting where the beliefs or the purported beliefs are going to be headed in the direction that moves in. But I also think about the ways in which then, even if position B is passed, this distances our culpability for one another, and the ways in which aversive procedures and harm are being used to try and shape behavior more broadly as a field. So like both through the use of contingent electric skin shock, but also a wide variety of other harmful procedures, and use of, aversive stimuli in learning, and all of the ways in which this harm has really been normalized as behavior analytic practice in our field. And I'm going to respectfully disagree with my colleague, Dr. Tarbox, in that I don't know that the reduction of coercion in the shaping of human behavior has been at the core of this field. I would say that it was a value stated by some scientists early on, but they did not have the contextual power to then decide what this field became. It's a microcosm of the white supremacist gatekeeping of broader academia and the sciences, and the ways in which research questions were shaped, what gets to be considered empirically validated, is all the behavior of the scientists and of who is allowed to design a research question and who's allowed to say what an effective procedure looks like, with data that have been curated based on whatever they decided was important to focus in on. And so, the ways in which what we even consider relying on scientific knowledge in this field to be, I would argue, are actually heavily based in coercion, and the science of coercion as a practice. And whether a statement is passed or not, I would really call for echoing some things that Oswin said, this idea that until there is a mechanism, and I don't know that one could ever effectively exist for broader, co-culpability of one another's practices, then it makes me feel really hesitant to think that we are ever going to be arriving at a place where this field can broadly be described as non-harmful, or that we could say that the things that are happening now are better, or the ways that behavior being shaped are better. And even in some of the ways that this shows up in the ethics code, but also in practice, this idea of shifting, okay, so to reinforcement-based learning as opposed to aversive-based learning, still so much space for coercion in that, right? If you're taking away the things that are important to people, the things that they value and that are meaningful to them and that they like, and then using that to, be what is provided as a consequence, contingent on the behavior that you desire to see them engage in, then it's no better, right? It's maybe marginally less harmful, but we're not seeing authentic responding. We're certainly not seeing appetitive learning or learning that's meaningful to people. And, why and to what end? The ways in which ableism more broadly infect the totality of what this field is, and the directions in which people are trained to shape behavior, and sort of the broader societal context of that, I think are things that we are required to be reckoning with, on a daily basis, in our individual practices, but in the ways that we engage with one another, and the standards that we hold one another to. So that's where I'm at with all of this. Thank you all for letting me come say hi.
Thank you so much for that. And also, sorry that I used your surname. I was backwards there. That was powerful, and thank you. You just came and told the whole truth. Do you feel like, given that this, unrelated to the science itself, which we can say, we could dissect the problems within the science, the field itself, you've mostly addressed the culture that has driven it, and this is a white supremacist, ableist culture. What is the current, what would you recommend as the current best step when we talk about decolonizing? We can't choose to overthrow the system and it just happens, right? So what can we do in the vein of harm reduction, and how can we how would you recommend people move forward? And when you're finished, Marty, I feel like you have a lot to say on that topic too. So if you want to take after Warner, then that would be good.
Yeah, that's such a good question. Thank you. And I think like harm reduction is truly the only thing that can maybe be aimed for, right? Is like minimizing the harm that is occurring. And it's one of those things where, you know, like harm can happen in any context, intentionally or unintentionally, but considering the power dynamics and the vast power difference between a behavior analytic practitioner and the person that they serve, or the people or the community that they serve, I feel like it is so critical to, you know, have a deep understanding of, you know, your positionality, the power that you wield, and the ways that that is showing up in your behavior, and also likely impacting the responses that you're getting at all levels of the system, of the people that you're engaging with and the folks that you're serving. I'd highly recommend learning about harm reduction based practices, the ones out of the field of substance use, and especially criminalized substance use, are pretty cross applicable to anything that would be considered high risk. And so if you are putting yourself in a position of considering yourself to be the person to intervene in somebody else's behavior that you or others are deeming to be high risk, then being able to consider the broad context of what is occurring for them, having vast amounts of knowledge of biological states and factors, but also environmental contexts, the ways in which, you know, like you may be aiding to harm instead of helping harm, are all going to be like really critical to be constantly analyzing, far more analysis of your own behavior, you know, than perhaps the behaviors of the human in front of you that you're supposed to be serving. And then education on decolonization. I think, you know, education on restorative and transformative justice practices are really critical as well, but also, you know, in that, prioritizing listening to humans who are actually impacted, and humans that are actually impacted, you know, across a breadth of intersecting actively oppressed identities, and being really cognizant of the multiple ways in which you may be occasioning harm for someone. And so like listening to that, and really giving authority and autonomy to the person in front of you, but then also to broader communities of folks who share, you know, identities with the populations that you serve, and you know, really being able to, I think, not just like hear those perspectives as a box that you've ticked off, but really center those in the design of what you consider your practices to be, and your ongoing self-assessment to be, the way that you train your supervisees to be, is going to be really critical to being able to move forward in ways that potentially reduce harm.
Thank you so much
you.
for that. Marty?
Yeah, so I thank you, first of all, for inviting me to be here, Tara. I'm always honored that you think of me in these situations. You know, I'm going to piggyback off of what Warner was saying in, you know, how we address this issue. Like ABAI, everything that it's doing exactly what the system is intending for it to do. And, you know, I've said it before that, you know, all of the iterations of the science, you know, behavior modification, behaviorism, radical behaviorism, all of it, none of it, you know, created any of these principles, right? Like we basically just captured these things in action of what a dominant, you know, white supremacist society, how it operated. And so the hardest thing about this issue with ABAI and the JRC is like, this is a system that is running the way it is intended to run. And so it's kind of funny that part of the change is going to require actually using the science to call itself out. I talk about quite often, Skinner, and I don't know what's more blasphemous to talk about Skinner or current day big names, but Skinner was shaped by interlocking behavioral contingencies of his time. So even though he's like making these observations on human behavior, he's still very much heavily influenced by being a white man living in Indiana. And so the things that he's talking about that are now embedded into the work that we're supposed to be doing are still deeply impacted by a Western hegemonic society. So even Skinner's work in and of itself is so restricted. I don't know that that man dealt with any natives or indigenous people on a daily basis. He surely didn't deal with, autistic indigenous people. And so to generalize a lot of what the science supposedly can, cover, to me has always been really interesting. So part of the work in decolonizing or even going further to say indigenizing is to recognize that interlocking behavioral contingencies, all that is the fancy word for the groups of people that are currently in charge, the groups of people that get to make the decisions. Back in Skinner's time, back in the 30s, the 50s, the 60s, who were the people that were in charge? White, male, privileged, had the PhDs. They were the ones in charge of the education system, the law enforcement system, religious, issues, all of these things, the medical system. They were the ones that were in charge making all of these decisions. And then the culture that resulted from that was that members that were in their people that were in their same membership of being white received access to opportunity, resources, success, whereas members did not. Fast forward to today, if we use this same principle, like who's in charge? So until we start deconstructing and having more individuals of color, more individuals of neurodivergence, until we start having them on platforms, until they are, equally represented in the research, not as participants, but as actual researchers, until they are equally represented as the developers of curricula, of textbooks, of practices, until those things start to shift, there is no deconstruction happening. And I'll be honest, that's something that I wrestle with a lot, being in the service field and being in a service industry, that I truly cannot offer cultural safety and cultural responsiveness in my care because we live through these parameters of this system that is very subtly evolving. Yes, Skinner has died. Yes, a lot of these founding fathers are no longer here, but there is a form of cultural heredity that is allowing these systems to stay in place. And so, I think Warner's correct in that we can tackle this with the CESS and ABAI and the JRC, but it is such a tiny piece, a tiny little cog in this huge moving system that sometimes I worry that if we hyper focus on this one piece so much and even start to get wedged, and Tara, you and I have talked about this wedging where the neurotypical dominant community will let us start to bicker amongst each other, we will not move beyond this, and other things will fly over our heads or fly past us that are even worse than what's happening right now. So I'm not saying we don't need to address it, but are we being alert to what else is going on around in addition to this? Because there is just, I don't know, the politics of it are one thing, but we're also, when we're talking about ABAI and the JRC, we are trying to tackle one of the most powerful generalized reinforcers on the planet, and that's the monetary benefit that is coming through. And I don't know if that's something that we've talked about yet, is like how, we see it all the time. People sell out their humanity for money and power. And this is no different of a situation. And so how do we help people, part of decolonizing and returning to indigenous models of care is like, what is your story? What is your humanity in this? And how do we help you remember that when the dollar sign has so easily swayed you away from that?
Thank you so much. I want to say, when you bring up the dollar amount, we can't figure out why. It is so, it's fought so hard to keep approximately 50 people on the GED in this one place. Why are they fighting so hard to keep this when the entire world is repulsed? The United Nations called it torture a long time ago. We've seen the videos of it. We know we know what this is. People have died there. It's on Wikipedia. It's not like private. Why are they fighting so hard? And we know they've lost money. They've lost a lot of membership. They've lost sponsors and vendors. Why are they fighting so hard? We don't know. So that's just, I don't know. It's baffling. As much as we've done deep dives into this, I kept thinking that we would figure this out. And someone in the comments said to avoid litigation. No, they're constantly litigated. I mean, if you look at the lawyer that sent us a cease and desist letter and a threat to sue us, if you look at his resume online, you'll see he's sued and won or gone head to head with like the Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and won over and over. Is it just hubris and ego that they can't lose? Because I can't, otherwise I don't know. Oswin, I know you have to leave, and then I want to pivot and ask Rachel Dorsey a question after you.
All right, so I want to go back first to Warner's comment about how reinforcement is kind of seen as a lesser evil of ABA, and I don't think that we can really look at it and say that, because it creates this idea that everything in your life is transactional, and then that has some long-term repercussions that are just as bad as the physical abuse. And so I really want to make sure people are hearing that, because because when we try to act like, or we try to say that that just giving that stopping aversives and just focusing on, I mean, one, taking away an interest area is an aversive, but if we then are using that to piecemeal it out for this transactional arrangement, then you are setting this up as that is the kid's worldview of what every interaction should be. And so like, that's just as damaging. So I need to put that out. Now, when it comes to Tara, your question on the on why they're fighting so hard, because their values don't match ours. They don't think there's anything wrong with hurting someone if it will get the behavioral outcome they want. This is how we get Ron Leaf saying on the rants with Justin and Joe that the reason they stopped slapping children is because it became politically incorrect to do so. And he said that like a couple of years ago. It's not like it's a past history. And this is the old guard. I think that there's a really strong idea that somehow we have gotten away from the original researchers. We haven't. Ron Leaf is still doing this work. Ron Leaf was under Lovaas in the original 1970s studies. So was Kogel, from that he and his wife went on to develop PRT. He was under Lovaas. This is that they were doing this research back in the 70s. So it's not like they're gone. They're still here. It's just not Skinner and Lovaas. And I think that if we can get our mind around that they're trying to hold on to their legacy, and they are in power and control enough, and they have enough power and control to continue to do this, it is because like Mari said, it's set up to be this way. It's really set up to be this way. And then even getting into what Mari is talking about, having autistic people and people of color involved in the research. There's so many other structural barriers to that aren't even ABA that we also have to think about. And if we're going within ABA, then we really need to be recognizing that we should be bringing in participatory action resource action research ideas and community-based participatory research as well. And that way we can actually get those voices in there without requiring that degree, that next form of gatekeeping to keep us out of that conversation. And I think all of these things all go in together on how they're able to keep power and why they continue to allow for these torturous, abusive practices. And we can't call them anything but abusive practices because they're literally they're the only things that most people recognize as abuse, even though I know that I and many other autistic people will say that a majority of all the practices we have in ABA are abuse. They're just not necessarily physical abuse. They're psychological abuse, they're emotional abuse. Some of it is still physical abuse, especially when we're going with withholding and then physical prompts to stop and restraints. Like even if we're just doing it for quiet hands, it's still a physical restraint. But if we really look at all of those things, then this is why they continue on, because they don't see anything wrong with that. They don't have those values and they don't share our values on that.
Thank you for those insights and for everything. I know Oswin has to go, but so happy that you came. And we're going to try and do another stream next week to do some deep dives into some of this, because we've hit some really important topics that we only got to graze today. Rachel, you are an autistic speech language pathologist, and you were at ABAI this year, the annual conference, and you spoke in a room full of people that we aired that on Neuroclastic. When you did that, it was very emotional for everyone, and I'm sure you had a long time to process that and probably still are. I want to know what you experienced there. Is it different in your own field? Do you feel that the ASHA, American Speech Hearing Language Association, and ABAI are all that different? And just, where are your thoughts at this point in time? Yeah, go take your time and just wave at me when you.
Different underlying values.
Right here.
Oh,
And
good.
Okay.
I completely agree with Oswin. Different underlying values and allies need to use the research on convincing those with different philosophical foundational views.
Relating to the question at hand. Relating to the question at hand. ABAI and ASHA are really similar. When I was at ABAI just for one day, one big difference I saw, that I will say is that it 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 seemed much more overtly predatory in nature. The feeling there, the feeling, it felt predatory, and it wasn't just me who thought that. It was everyone that I went with. I I I couldn't help but notice that there was a lot of uh old older men, white men.
If you want me to come back in a minute, we can. Not rushing you. You can take as long as you need, but just let me know.
No, I'm gonna thank you, but I'm gonna continue forward.
Okay, take your time.
Yeah, there was a lot of older white men and groups of younger BCBAs and graduate students, and it felt very gross. And I realized that the older men were likely like PIs in labs, and or other prominent people in the field. I was really, it was very distressing and disturbing. However, or not however, Asha, they there it I've been to Asha conventions several times, and it never felt that overtly awful. Predatory in that type of a way. But when it comes to the politics and the research and so much of the day-to-day practice, and not just that, the way that ASHA in the very structure of ASHA, if you have it, if you don't fit into the mold of being a SLP, you are not, you can't be an SLP. So the people that end up being SLPs are those that have enough privilege and in the case of autistic SLPs, masking abilities to make it up to make it. The SLP has something called a clinical fellowship, which is a huge another way to block talented people from fully being in the profession. Gosh, I'm kind of going in another direction, specifically on contingent electric skin shock. ASHA hasn't made a statement because why would they? Why would they want, there's no benefit. There's no conceivable benefit to ASHA making any sort of a statement
So they're operating to preserve their power in the same, and to preserve their old networks of privilege instead of to benefit disabled people.
Absolutely. Words are kind of obviously hard right now.
You're doing great.
ASHA only cares about this, I mean, I'm hearing all these names being thrown out by BCBAs, or no, not by BCBAs, but by autistic advocates, because the BCBAs can't throw out names of prominent problematic researchers in the field, but ABAI is protecting them, and ASHA does the same exact thing.
Yep.
And the politics from academia to the universities and all the way to the ASHA journals to like ASHA like board members. It's all to protect and continue to empower the
Old guard.
yeah. I mean, the obvious examples are, ASHA's position statement on RPM and spelling to communicate, and all of the politics going on there. It's pervasive throughout every single faction of, I don't know if I use that word correctly, of ASHA. It's present everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All of that. And we see a lot of the same exact political posturing and an erasure of not just the primary stakeholders, disabled people themselves, but especially disabled people working within these fields, trying to bring the community voices to the table and be decision makers, and just watching the industrial, the organizational gatekeeping is traumatizing to everyone who tries. They're ending up in the crossfires of extremely powerful people who operate as if they don't even care if we live or die. And I'm not exaggerating by that. I mean that in as strong of terms as you can interpret that. Before I move to anyone else, I want to ask our panelists, is there anyone who's on a tight time constraint who needs to be next?
I am going to have to hop off to go pick up my kiddo.
Okay, Jenny, you go next then. I will do the same thing. I will just abandon asking a specific question and just, is there something that you really would like to add?
Rachel, I just want to say thank you for your vulnerability and your words. I know that was so difficult, and it makes me feel sick to my stomach that I'm affiliated with a field that makes humans experience this type of emotion. So many of us did not get into the field of behavior analysis to hurt people. And something to, when Tara had sent over a list of talking points, something that stood out to me is the relationship between behavior analysts and the autistic community. And it's starting point even there of how so many behavior analysts do treat autistic advocates. If autistic advocates dare enter an ABA space and try to offer up criticism or personal subjective opinions about the industry or parts about our science, the instinct is to shut down, shut up, rip apart, defend, criticize, humiliate, and it's disgusting to watch day in and day out. That you would think that if we got into a field to help a certain population, to help support a certain population, we would want to know what they think about us and the type of work that we're doing. And if we're failing in certain areas, how can we collaborate with them to do better? But it's that mindset, that old guard mindset and colonialism and our oppressive structures that behavior analysts, if we dare allow autistics to enter our space and speak their truth, then our livelihood is at risk. For how dare us, for the sake that behavior analysis must always be presented in such a positive light. How dare we critique it, which goes directly against social validity at the core of what our science is all about. So then even from that angle, do we really expect these people to care? If we can't even care about the autistic community showing up in our spaces, telling us time and time again, how can we expect these people to care about the ones locked away that don't even have a voice to talk about it, to tell us what they're experiencing? And it's disgusting. We can rip through that task force report of, you know, what is our responsibility to our consumers, to our clients. We can go through it point by point through our ethics code, and how CSS and the JRC is epically failing these learners that are in our care, from the point that our ethics code says we need to gain assent. But yet we have learners telling investigators, please get me out of here. For the love of God, stop shocking me. That's not proof enough that of assent, really? That we don't do anything with that. Or what about the fact that then we're treating these learners for desperately trying to rip CSS off of their body? That's not assent withdrawal, to desperately get away from it. And yet we don't care because it might be effective. But then we also have the data saying it takes an average of 5 years of experiencing electric shock to get any data points we could even be able to publish or present on. Or the fact that CSS is called by Nathan himself a prosthetic rather than a curative, that is always going to be required to be attached to this person's body. And we are ethically upheld to our learners to find naturalistic treatments that are faded out. So there's nothing about this that's ethical. There's nothing about this vote that's ethical. It is absolutely absurd. We are going into the year 2023, and we're sitting here having a vote on torturing people. Really, it's ridiculous. All right, that's sorry. I think it went on longer than I intended to, but yeah. Thank you for having me, Tara.
Thank you. And thank you for all of that. And when I said earlier that people are at risk of losing their jobs and their careers and putting themselves in the crossfires of this quote old guard, Jenna Lee, I hope you don't mind me bringing this up.
That's fine.
Just from allowing me in a space to voice. And you know, not only I am an autistic person, but I also am a professional with a lot of experience and a graduate degree. So I was not allowed to be in those spaces and express without generally getting reported to multiple different credentialing agencies and losing a job because she refused to kick me out. I didn't even know about all of this until afterwards. But that's how big of a risk this is for the people who are up here today, who are saying these things. That's a problem. Carrie and Josh, Rachel, Lauren, Jules, and Danny, I need to get to all of you and give you time to say what feels most important to you on this subject. Josh, you turn your camera on. Do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I can do. First off, thanks for having me here. I've appreciated what everybody has been saying. I'm a little worried. I'm a little weary that potentially some of this stuff is dangerously easy for me to talk about. I think my biggest contribution is probably still just referring everybody back to the FDA report that was started in 2014, and it's got an outrageous amount of data there. Every argument has been raised and beaten down.
Can we get somebody to
unjustifiable.
link that in the comments?
Absolutely.
That FDA report, while Josh is talking, we will put it in the comments so everyone can reference it later. because it's really, you won't sleep. If you read it, you won't sleep the same ever again.
Yeah, and that's. I think other people have talked about that as well. It does. It impacts your sleep. Um, it's the sort of thing. When it came out, reading through, I thought, oh, I'm probably spending a bit too much time on this because it's going to be banned soon. This is all going to be an irrelevant footnote in history. The evidence is so overwhelming that it's scientifically indefensible. And I think that's something that you see time and time again. They've got the same arguments. You can go back to the 90s when they first introduced it, that they were making the exact same arguments about efficacy or this sort of thing. What are the other options? To try and justify some of these practices or its existence in general. And I think there's a common theme, and you see it in other things as well, where it gets split into science versus morality or ethics or feelings or emotions, a sort of facts versus feelings that gets brought up in most things, and it's wrong on both sides. But by having that division, you can jump from one side to the other. And I think that was present even in the task force report, that sort of, well, we need to look at the evidence. The evidence isn't there. And so they bring up anecdotes. And it's trying to play both sides in a way that's very gross. Anyway, it's just, from 2014, we've had all the information that it ought to have been banned. 2016 was the final ruling that, yes, unequivocally, that it should be banned. 2020, it was banned. 2022, we're trying to decide whether we should agree that it should be banned or not. I think it's worse than saying nothing. Trying to compare to comparable practices is difficult. I can't think of any that you could do without causing extreme offense of something that has been so unequivocally decided that no, we should not do this. This is undignified and it's ineffective. And then to raise it as an issue so far after there is a consensus is terrible. And then the extra part of that is the reason that it is being brought up, which is the extraordinary circumstances that they're talking about. It's a coded way of talking about people with disabilities or that sort of thing, that by virtue of their status, we can justify doing harmful things. And that's what it boils down to. And it's unacceptable. And I think the only other thing is maybe people should prepare not to challenge ABAI, but just to move forward without them. It's the sort of thing when you've got an organization that's not representing your values, it's very difficult to get into.
How do we move forward without them when they have so much power? Because okay, yes, I'm down.
Yeah.
How, though? What can we do to get around them? Because I don't... until I heard... The reason that we're doing this live stream is that we got information, we got an inside tip that... And I can't verify this, so I don't know if it's accurate or not. But what I was told from someone that I believe has accurate information is that there has been pushback within the inner ranks of ABAI. They have not finished the vote, so it's not complete, but the information I received is currently more people are voting to go with the second position statement that will be against shock. And that this is making people in the executive branch of ABAI unhappy, and they are talking about looking at ways to use the task force report a task force that was chosen with people with extreme ethical conflicts of interest who have historically defended or worked with or worked under people who are on the board of Judge Rotenberg Center. So this task force of 4 old guard white people who benefit in some way from going with the status quo, went with the status quo just like we would expect them to, because they were selected. They didn't choose any multiply marginalized people. They did not choose any openly disabled people. They chose people that were going to say exactly what they wanted them to say. How do we move around them to stop shock right now? Because I want it stopped right now. And I want to also say we have lost 6 advocates, and I know of others who have been hospitalized for attempts at ending their own life in the last few months. And this is, no one can know what exactly was in their minds, but I know from my position as an advocate and other people who I work with who have fought so hard, this is killing us. And I mean that literally. We can't stand that this could happen to our children. I have a lot of people on my friend list in my circle whose children are dead because of injustice and ableism, who've said that they feel they feel that it would be worse if their kids were still alive but stuck at JRC. Why do we have to have these conversations with those parents? And why does it, as a parent, I can't imagine something much worse than being powerless while my child was at a place like that. I can't imagine it. I don't want to imagine it. Imagining it is ruining me. But I can't help it, because if we stop, the FDA, the United Nations, the Department of Justice, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has not stopped this. Who can? And please someone save me and just take over next.
Thank you for that. And I guess at the risk of taking over, I know we have a lot of people that want to speak in a very short amount of time, but I wanted to piggyback on a couple of things that others have said. I think Oswin hit the nail on the head when Faye talked about mentioning power, and I know we've been discussing that since then. What really struck me, though, was when Mari mentioned using the field to criticize ourselves, because we call ourselves a science. That's the point of science. You should be critically looking at evidence and poking holes in absolutely everything. The flaws in the measurement, and I'm using that word very loosely here, in that report, go against radical behaviorism. There's a constant issue in this field of, we talk about how great we are for using radical behaviorism, which just means that we're supposed to take private events into account and then just casually throw that out the window. When I was reading that statement and just watching ABAI's behavior through all of this, all I can ever think is they do know we're behavior analysts too, right? Like you know that we can see what you're doing. Like, it's not very subtle. The gatekeeping, the attempts at keeping certain people in power, limiting voices, but then they'll say something else, and it looks to me, at least as a behavior analyst, that they're shooting themselves in the foot. One of the things that stood out to me was they are pointing out that nobody has treated severe behavior without severe punishment. They have Greg Hanley in their resources, and yet somehow failed to mention enhanced choice or My Way, which I found mind-blowing. There's no way you haven't heard of that, especially if you are diving into the research. no way a BCBA, excuse me, would have not heard of that. They mention meds as if BCBAs have any scope to discuss that. And I know that they say they collaborate with psychiatrists, but what does
We
that
have
look like?
spreadsheets to show you who they're collaborating with. I
Ooh,
think
I
it's
would
about time
love
for
to
us
see
to
that.
put those out because we have collected hundreds of thousands of documents, or tens of thousands at least, of documents, and some of our team have put those into spreadsheets so that you can see what judges, what providers, what social workers for hire. Because when you have a social worker who is private, that's an oxymoron, first of all, because social should be a socialized thing. But if you have a private social worker signing off on things, that's a signature for hire. If you have one psychology or psychiatry professional signing all of these behavior plans, if you have 2 or 3 judges, if you have to convince a judge in a 5-minute hearing that someone is incapable of deciding that they don't want to be shocked and tortured, no, we have this data. And when they said that that's too much data, when ABAI said that was too much data for them to go through, no, our team of volunteers went through that data.
What BCBA says that's too much data?
That is at ABAI. They said that on the stage. That's too much data for us to all review. And in the year plus that it took the task force to write that terrible report, that's basically just a regurgitation of the same propaganda that Judge Rotenberg Center repeats constantly. It's the same talking points. I could have copied and pasted that in 3 minutes. Like, there was almost nothing in that. But when they say they didn't have time to go through all that data, yes, they did, because our team of volunteer people, autistics, went through all the available data, and we didn't have the same easy access that they did. We had to get the data the hard ways. We have that data. We might just go ahead and publish it all at once. Who knows?
Yeah, do it. I got
The
a weekend
only
ahead of me.
reason you're going to need a lot more than a weekend. The only reason we haven't done that is because we do not know if it is more ethical to publish it or to protect the privacy and dignity of the people who are mentioned in these reports. Because a lot of the people there, you know, we wonder, how do parents let this happen? A lot of people there were wards of the state. They were victims of sexual abuse. They were in foster care. And that it is killing us that we are out here fighting for them and they have no way to even know that we love them and we think that their lives matter, because they're not allowed to know that we exist to access community. That's a problem already in and of itself without the shock. Carrie, thank you for coming. I know you have COVID. But you spoke at ABAI and you spoke very strongly. I know you have a lot to say on this, so let's put it out there. Wait.
Right. You know, a lot has been said by so many wonderful people today. I've been able to listen intermittently from this morning and this afternoon, and I just applaud the efforts of everyone, and also knowing what it means for some professionals to say the things. So with that said, you know, I wonder, going back, Tara, when you were talking in response to Josh's comments earlier, it made me think, I wonder if we're giving too much stage or credit to ABAI. You know, we have other professional organizations that have come out and made statements, and we have to understand that ABA is now an industry. We used to, like, we're a field, but like there's been a lot of change since when I was in grad school 20 years ago, and ABAI was like the one conference you went to, and it was still housed in a hotel, not a conference center. And now it's exploded, but also there's so many other areas like there's APBA, which looks at the professionalism of our field, and they came out with a statement against shock. And there's CalABA and there's MassABA, who are subsidiaries of ABAI that actually are able to more represent the practitioners. I think Jonathan mentioned earlier today that the full membership, and I'm not one to criticize bylaws of an organization, but that's like the only people who can vote are the full members of ABAI. And in looking at that, a lot of our practitioners today would not qualify for the full membership because a lot of the graduate schools do not have a terminal thesis. You don't have to get a thesis in order to get a master's degree. It also says project, but it depends on the graduate school if that project then would meet the evaluation standards of whoever evaluates your application. So when you apply to ABAI, you do so in hopes of a full membership, but it's then as an affiliate member if you don't pass the sniff test. And so and they did that because like ABAI was more like, in my belief, it's more scientific. It's just why we have APBA that looks more at the professionalism and the practice and guiding practitioners to be members there. And then you have a lot of people who are members of CalABA or like their state local chapters. So yes, obviously let's have ABAI make this claim to us who think that it's easy to say, please stop torturing people and please don't just call it punishment, because looking at providing shock in comparison to removing points from a token economy, that's a false equivalence. But let's also look at like, what if we had all the state chapters actually give a statement, because those would actually be more representative of our field. But the state in which this is being conducted already put out a statement. APBA already put out a statement. Why is the licensing board of Massachusetts now utilizing those statements with respect to the regulation of this practice? Is it so much that ABAI puts out a statement and we vote, or is it like, let's stop doing the thing? And so I wonder if there's a way that like we can enforce, looking at let's cut out the loopholes. Let's say that those loopholes are kind of we don't support those loopholes in saying that like, well, this is just punishment, and this clause in the ethics code is talking about punishment and shock is punishment. Like, come on, like we're talking about contemporary applications of behavior analysis, and every single report that we have looked at said that this is not contemporary applications of behavior analysis. And I think that like we as a field are really behind in having this discussion. At least we're having it finally, but goodness gracious, it is a little bit too late. And so all the people who would vote have left that membership body. So now it is 70% white. It's still predominantly female because our field is female, but there's more males in ABAI than there are practitioners who hold a BACB certificate. So all of those things actually leverage us. And then that's all members. So we don't even know about the demographics of a full member, which is probably a little bit more, in that ivory tower classification.
Yeah.
So I just, my thing is that like, I wonder if like, yes, let's hold them accountable, and let's hope that this is a vote that I was told differently. I was told that it's electronic and there's safeguards in place, and so let's hope that this is a membership vote. But also, even if the vote is B, does that mean that this practice is going to stop? Who has that jurisdiction? Will that statement from ABAI be enough to then have the licensing board to enact upon the BCBAs at that location. I think that they have enough. I used to be the chair of our licensing board in Nevada. That would be enough information for me to move forward on looking at an organization saying, okay, this is the state, this is where these people stand. But, you know, I don't know where their licensing board stands with those things.
Thank you for all of that. And we, you know, if you look at the lawyer who sent us a cease and desist letter, if you look at his resume, you're going to find out why Massachusetts has not and licensing boards have not intervened. They've tried. They've tried a lot of times. They've been sued
really?
and they've lost. So that, I mean, they keep winning. So yeah, that doesn't absolve anyone from stopping trying. If we think that we can go and intervene on war-torn nations, why can we not intervene on our own soil for war crimes against disabled people? Jules, I feel like you might have a lot to say about, and so do I, about the harms in residential schools and brutality and the state sanctioning it. But whatever you want to say, go ahead and say. Everybody in our audience probably knows who you are, but you can introduce yourself too if you want.
Sure. I'm Jules Edwards. I'm the blogger of Autistic Typing. I am Anishinaabe and autistic and a bunch of other things. And I do a lot of advocacy work. I am very much against all forms of ABA. I believe that we need to abolish ABA in its entirety. There is no harm reduction. We need to eliminate it. And that's just like point blank, that's my position. So when I was invited to join today, I had a lot of things kind of like running through my head. And one of the first known uses of electric shocks as a form of discipline was in Indian residential schools in the early 1900s. And I think about what Native children experienced those shocks. It was the non-compliant children. Native kids aren't diagnosed accurately as autistic or otherwise neurodivergent. Often Native children are misdiagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And it's a way to blame the mother. It's not really different than that refrigerator mother theory that used to exist, but it's targeted for Native mothers specifically. So the electric shocks, there's no reason that they need to exist in any scenario. I'm sorry if you can hear my daughter's dog outside. I hope not. But when we're thinking about the vote of ABAI and who gets to have a say and who doesn't get to say, I pulled up this description of white supremacy culture, and I'm going to briefly talk about like the traits of it. And it was developed by Kenneth Jones and Tima Okun through Changework in 2001. And the first item on there is perfectionism. Another is defensiveness. Another is quantity over quality, worship of the written word, paternalism, either or thinking, putting things in a binary, power hoarding, fear of open conflict, individualism, whereas people fight for themselves and put themselves over others. Progress is bigger and more rather than an ebb and flow in a natural order of things. And it's a very linear perspective. the idea of objectivity, because objectivity doesn't exist. Believing that there is such a thing as being objective is such a privileged take because it relies on the idea that there is a default way to perceive the world. And that isn't real. And finally, the right to comfort. That means that the idea of, if I'm doing wrong, I still deserve to be comfortable in discussions about my wrongdoing. Everything that ABAI is doing with this vote fits into white supremacy culture. They're perpetuating harms that have been targeting BIPOC specifically for generations. And I don't have the exact data of who is being tortured at Judge Rotenberg's Center. I'm sure there's data that exists, and I've read it, but I don't have the greatest memory. But how can this stand? How do we not recognize the humanity of the people who are subject to these abusive practices? How is this a debate? I don't understand how it's a debate. And bringing this back to the idea of electric chairs that were created and used in Indian residential school, there was a specific residential school called St. Anne's, and they had a homemade electric chair. And I'm sure Native children died on it, but most frequently they used it as a form of discipline. And they used it for sport, for fun. And I'm sure that happens at Judge Rotenberg Center as well. I'm sure that there are some sadistic humans. I mean, and honestly, you've got to be sadistic in some form or another in order to be able to press the button to shock another human being. And they can pretend they're being altruistic. They can pretend that they're trying to help someone. But there are people who push the button for fun. And they belong in prison. And I don't even believe in prisons. But people deserve to be protected. Vulnerable people especially deserve to be protected. And that's not happening. And it's disgusting. But when we're looking at what happened in St. Anne's, there's somehow a debate about whether or not it was cruel. And there are people who are arguing against paying out claims for the torture that Native children endured. And those children are still alive. Some of them are still alive. And we're just okay with it. And we're debating it. And there's a vote. And when we think about voting and the concept of majority rules, think about in the United States, who is the majority? White folks. The white people, whatever the white people decide, is what is going to have the most power. So majority rules is always racist because it is never equitable. If we rely on the majority of the people to do the right thing, that means we have to appeal to the good conscience of good white people who decide they want to not perpetuate racism. Great. Hopefully that's most of them, but we know that that's not true. So how do we dismantle white supremacy within this process, within what is happening to disabled children and adults? How do we dismantle this? Abolish ABA. That's where I'm at. Abolish it entirely. I rest my case.
Thank you for all of that. It's really, yeah, I have a lot to say, and I'm very grateful for you, but I just don't have the composure right now to say it. So I'm going to pivot to Danny. Thank you, first of all, for coming back, and you were here in our first session and had so much to say. I know you have a lot to say now, so just open the floor to you to take it where you want to take it.
I don't know if you've been able to see my face like throughout this like video, but I've been like holding back a lot of emotion, and it's a lot to process as somebody who is not only autistic, but somebody who has been victimized by a lot of the same culture and policies of these forms of behavioralism. And I do want to say, like, with Jules, like, all the thoughts that I had like running through my head are the things that I want to say. Like you said, like 95% of it already. I don't have any stats or anything to mention. Really, just like I want to know why. Like that's my big question. Is like how and like how do these people sleep at night knowing that they're causing, you know, permanent harm to another human being? Like how like what thought process like goes through a person to think like I'm gonna hurt somebody? I don't understand that, and I don't understand how like somebody who's like aware of these things will continue to like be a part of that field. And like I just I it doesn't I like I can't wrap my head around it. So all the thoughts that I had of like the things I want to say that were like, you know, more grounded in like, you know, I've lost that. I don't understand how like these things can continue. I it's not I may not physically be in these centers where these things are happening, but people like me are. And as somebody who just like I'm sorry, I'm at a loss of words and I'm finding a hard time to kind of like direct what I'm trying to say. But I think that like in order for actual change to happen, I agree with Jules that the foundation of focusing on behavior needs to be eliminated in the sense of how it is being carried out and has been carried out. And that's not just with ABA. That's, you know, in the way in our systems of policing. That's in our system of capitalism. That's it. Like in every fundamental aspect of our society, there is this reward and punishment, and have and have nots, and thesis and antithesis. It doesn't matter what perspective it is, and the fact that like a marginalized community that has often doesn't have the ability or the power, like has the power taken from them of in their own humanity is disgusting, and I don't understand. I think that autistic people need to be able to have the authority given back to them, or for the first time given to them, to be able to dictate what our experiences are. We need to be listened to, and we need to have those who are in power that are deciding things for us, you know, and dictating what like our like the standard of who we're supposed to be. Like it's like up to them. It's like and how we express ourselves and how we like the fundamental aspect of how we exist is dictated from childhood of by them. And like we need to be able to do that for ourselves. And when agencies and fields have groups of individuals who don't have our experiences are deciding how we get to live, it's barbaric, and I can't process that. So yeah, again, a lot of emotion here, but yeah, thank you for letting me express what I wanted to say.
Thank you. And, you know, we have two things that Kate is going to read. There was Dr. Mary Jane Weiss was going to come, but she was unable to work it into her schedule. She is very respected professional in the field of ABA, and she stood up at ABAI and and really kicked against the grain in that Judge Rotenberg Center. The open forum at ABAI, where Rachel Dorsey spoke, and some other autistic advocates like the Autistic OT. And also Carrie spoke there, and some other people that we've had on this program today and earlier today. But she challenged everyone in a way that, for someone with her level of privilege and status, is rare. And so she left a comment and said that Kate can read.
So, Mary Jane says, as you all know, there's a controversy deeply impacting our field regarding ABAI's pending vote on position A or position B for shock. As for me, I voted for position B. It was a very simple decision. Shock deeply violates our commitment to humane, compassionate, and dignified care. In addition, in my opinion, shock does not represent how behaviour analysts approach the understanding of and/or the process of changing behaviour. Information on shock appears in no texts and is not routinely taught in courses. A ban on shock has been supported by position statements from other organisations within our field, which have also questioned its inclusion in our scope of practice. In my almost 40 years in the profession, I have never known any clinician to use shock or to contemplate its use. The people I know who are behaviour analysts are humane and are compassionate. They acknowledge the mistakes of the past and they embrace the evolution of our field. They include the voices of autistics and their perspectives and their work, and they work to eradicate wrongdoing and injustice towards all individuals. Many individuals who are actively involved in ABA and in the care of autistics have discovered that they cannot vote on this crucial issue. Voting is available only to full members of ABAI and not to affiliate or student members. If we cannot vote, I believe that expressing our rejection of shock is still essential, important, and urgently needed. If you would like your voice to be heard, I urge you to share your concern about restricted voting allowances and/or share what your vote is or would be. We are the future of ABA. Please do all you can to ensure that your voice is heard. Mary Jane Weiss.
And then we also had someone else who had to leave, and I'll have Kate read that too, if you don't mind.
Yeah. This was Lauren Lestimer Allen, who I'm sorry if I've pronounced your name wrongly, but Lauren says, in response to your question of why this is now being debated, A, this group's and others' advocacy that people in power can't ignore any longer, and B, also geographical awareness, I believe. I'm a licensed psychologist and behaviour analyst. I'll share my perspective. In graduate school 15 years ago, I learned of JRC, and at that time it was discussed with us as something that happened in our history. At the time, the JRC must have been shut down because this was not actively occurring anywhere. My cohort of colleagues in this class discussion were appalled that this was part of our history. Then, to find out many years later that JRC was open again, I was in disbelief. In speaking with many psychologists and behaviour analyst colleagues across the country who, prior to the much wider awareness that advocacy of this group and others have garnered on this topic, shared my disbelief when I was sharing that this was still actively occurring at JRC in NJ. I think there is still some lack of awareness for behaviour analysts in other parts of the country, to who are less in the background of JRC or who are less in contact with or seeking understanding from autistic or neurodivergent communities. I think that the large majority of the field are disgusted by this and understand that effective does not mean humane. There are many examples in human history where behaviour change has been promoted through inhumane methods. We should not have to still be arguing this. Ineloquently, I do not understand why those in positions of power diverge from the wider field, who are, to my understanding, in agreement that CESS should be banned, and the expense of human rights and dignity. It only benefits JRC. Why are they worth it? Also, I love your comment, Kerry. Let's knock the power out of ABAI so that many gatekeepers in the field that do not represent the voices of the majority of the field. She said, I have to go. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm just reading the whole thing because I copied and pasted the whole thing. So thank you, Lauren.
And I want to say 2 of the founders of ABAI are Dick Malott, or Richard, goes by Dick adequately, and Maria Malott. They co-founded ABAI together. They were married at the time. Dick Malott is on the board of Judge Rotenberg Center, and Maria Malott has been the CEO of ABAI and the treasurer since 1993. So we're going on 3 decades here of that. Dick Malott has been the former president of ABAI. He founded the Autism Center that one of the 4 task force members works for and runs. And so effectively, he is the boss of one of the 4 task force members and one of the most influential people in the field. He was banned from the largest ABA group for racism and sexism, the largest ABA group on Facebook. It's got over 20,000 people in it. He was at Cal ABA's annual conference, and he had his mic cut in the middle of his speech for misogyny and racism. Like, it was so bad that they turned his microphone off and physically escorted him off the stage. This is the old guard. And we hear autistic people have been saying for a lot of years that ABA is a cult. Yesterday, when I was talking to some of the most prominent figures in the field of ABA, and a lot of these people are also psychologists and have other degrees, and they do not and never have work in direct intervention. They do more research and teaching courses and whatnot. But they were saying the old guard is a cult. There's no other way to describe it. They have a lot of toxic ideas that they preserve at all costs. And we have seen today that there are a lot of people who are willing to challenge harm and to do things. There are a lot of people in the field of ABA and also in SLP and OT who don't leave because this space that they occupy would just be taken by someone who's less, who provides less of a challenge to the status quo. And so they understand the harms, but they know that they can't, if they leave, what takes their place. It's kind of like how all the people who boycotted ABAI and left and stopped paying dues can't vote in this. So you have that predicament now of we have the complacent people who are left. And so that's where things are. This is not us saying that we should give ABA a chance. Neuroclastic doesn't have a position on any therapy or anything other than we have specific things that are harmful that we recommend against. But I personally do not think that the addressing observable behaviors is a therapy, and shaping behaviors is a therapy. That is something that, there are BCBAs who do sports analysis, who do traffic analysis, and there are BCBAs who use different modalities and don't work with autistic people at all or provide intervention, but just work with adults, disabled or not, who want specific things. So that's a general thing, but I don't think that we should be trying to intervene on autism, period. Like, that is not, and that's not to say that individual behaviors that children engage in should just, we should just let kids run into the street, like I said the last time, and not not try to stop them from doing that. That's called parenting. We already have, and parents need support, and they need help, and they need a connection to community. I don't feel like any field currently is doing anything to support them through that. I think they're coming in and saying they have answers they don't have a right to say they have. And they are just trying things that are harmful. They don't understand how things are causing harm. And I think that they're working within systems that are failed. I felt the same way as a school teacher, which is why I'm not a school teacher anymore. But yeah, I want to leave Kate and Jules some room to just say whatever you feel like saying, because I'm sure it's something good.
PDA kicked in. You've broken it now. I was going to say something incredible, but now I can't. No, I keep going back to, why are we even having this conversation? Why is there a conversation about whether we should vote on tortures? Who should vote on torture? Who should be allowed to vote on torture? It's absurd. My heart is broken. I'm just really grateful for everyone who showed up today. People who made themselves vulnerable. People who have been doing the right thing when no one's been looking for years and years and years. People who have been devastated by this and doing the work anyway. I'm just so grateful. And Jules, thank you for what you brought. That was really impactful and valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to join because it sounded like a discussion amongst people who have knowledge and experience and education and a lot of privilege in terms of like specific language, and including BCBAs in the conversation. And to me, that feels disgusting. And I know that a lot of viewers will feel the same way. And I don't believe that harm reduction is enough. But I still do what I can to reduce harm while also fighting for better treatment for all of us, including abolishing ABA, including, making shock treatments illegal. So I'm here because I believe we can do both at the same time. And I know that the guttural reaction for a lot of people who are going to view this, whether they viewed it live or after the fact, they're going to be angry that this conversation took place in the way that it did. And I just want to recognize that I see you as an organization, as Neuroplastic, is trying to do both. So, and also ABA is not therapy. Thank you.
And yes, you're right. As an organization, we are trying to do both. And this is hard. And it is, these systems exist. And there are people at various stages of privilege and power that are far above our heads who are saying, how can I help? And we're just kind of, if they listen to us, if they listen to you, Jules and Danny and the rest of our community, Oswin and Rachel, I feel like that is harm reduction. I feel like seeing our humanity and knowing us is a step in that direction. And we talk about this a lot as a team, it's really hard to know what the what the best thing to do is, because there is not a binary right and wrong. There's not a definite this is the thing. And it's hard. It's a risk that we all take. Just listening to this is emotionally draining. Being a part of it is. So thank you for saying that, because yeah, there's no choiceless choices is what is a phrase I've used several times today. And I feel like most of us, even people who are acknowledging that they've been a big part of the problem, still feel like at their level of privilege they only have choiceless choices, like bad choices. And so of the people who said overthrow ABAI, yeah, let's do that. How we do that? So
I'm in, except I know that there are children locally who are being removed from the care of their parents, put into foster homes and group homes, who are subject to 24/7 control by BCBAs because it is the fault of Native parents that their children are autistic or something. And, I would love to overthrow ABAI. I would also like to get rid of NCSA as an organization, revoke their tax exempt status. I would love to do all of those things, but I don't have that kind of power. The power that I have is sharing my voice and occupying spaces that were not meant for me, and riling people up and getting people to consider new things, introducing people to new concepts and ideas and constructs, like the characteristics of white supremacy and how it applies within disability, like in all kinds of different ways. So if we could overthrow it, like, let me know how. I'm down. But in the meantime, I'm also going to do this.
Same.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah. And that, we don't know what to do. Nobody's done things like this exactly this way before. So we're all kind of just trying all the things that we have within our sphere and scope of influence. What difference can we make? And if these people above us who have more privilege, who have a larger sphere of influence, are saying, we want to give our power to you, we want to give our platform to you, and at the same time we grow our own platform and we build our own community of healthy supports, of healthy ways of thinking about things. And that is the reason that we exist as a nonprofit is we're not direct support providers. We are here to help people change the way they think about things. So yeah, it's kind of where we are at this point. Thank you, Jules. Always, every time you say something, it's powerful.
Thank you. Also, shout out to my cat and my fidget popper for getting me through this.
All right. Well, we're going to end here. Thank you to everyone who's listened and who in the future will listen to these recordings. We invite you to not feel like you have no voice, because that's what they have set. They have set the groundwork to make us disenfranchised from our own realities, and to feel like we're powerless. And that feeling is robbing us of our quality of life. So we have to do what we can to take the power that we can grab, and that everything we try, when we're trying, we hope that we're having an impact. Kate, you always have a better thing to say than me, so you want
No.
Okay, that's good.
In
That's
my
perfect.
defense, it's later with me than it is with you, and I've been at work for 12 hours, so I'm not at my best. I'm also just really reflecting on everything I've heard today, and I'm just really grateful for community, because I think we can stop shock. I think it will be autistic people. I think it will be community that does it.
Yeah,
I
that.
really believe that.
I think so too. Okay, that was perfect. Bye,
Okay,
everybody.
great.
Love you all.
Bye.